All right, everybody ready? Okay, this meeting of the Zoning Advisory Committee on April 21st, 2022 is officially called to order. Okay, Tyler, you got roll? Oh yeah, she was just here.
You want to wait a minute?
I think she went in the back.
I think you can call roll and then we can add her back in.
Cool. All right. Happy Thursday, everyone. Let's do some roll call. Polly Boardman.
Present.
Kristen DeHaan. Christy Essa. Darren Fleck.
Present.
Natalie Geisels.
Present.
Amy Howe. Christine Hull.
Present.
Araceli Martinez. Others? No. Adriana Publico.
Here.
Tyler Rogers. Here. Lauren Rushing.
Present.
Brooke Schneider.
Here. Do you want to recall?
Yeah, Christy Esses here. There we go. Cool. We've got a quorum.
Okay, quick reminder for everyone on the committee, when you speak, just as we're discussing, make sure that you say your name for the record for our minutes. That will be helpful. And for the public, quick reminder, the agendas and the presentation copies are back there on that table, along with the public comment cards. They're bright green. You can't miss them. And so if you could turn those into this table, I'm like a flight attendant, you can turn them into this table right here. For any public comment. Okay. So, items for presentation, discussion, information, and/or action. Public comments. Public comments from the public are invited at this time on items listed for possible action. A public comment card should be filled out and submitted to the recording secretary before speaking during the public comment section, which must at least include the name of the speaker. This is pursuant to Board Policy 9115. Meetings of the Board of Trustees, all persons are limited to 3 minutes per item, and the time limit may be altered at the discretion of the president or the chair of the committee, but we are not breaking open meeting law tonight, so we're sticking with 3 minutes, friends.
3 minutes.
In order to comply with Nevada Revised Statutes, Chapter 241, Open Meeting Law, and on the advice of legal counsel, we are discouraged from discussing and precluded from deliberating or acting on items raised by public comment which are not already on the agenda. So that means we cannot respond during public comment. Pursuant to NRS 241.035, correspondence and/or written materials submitted for public comment shall be attached to the minutes of the meeting, and all of our committee members have received those in email ahead of time. The Board of Trustees and/or committee may impose reasonable, content-neutral restrictions on public comments, such as willfully disruptive comments that are irrelevant, repetitious, slanderous, offensive, inflammatory, irrational, amounting to personal attacks, or interfering with the rights of other speakers. The committee will also accept public comment before and during the meeting through zoning@washofschools.net. The board will take the time to read those comments during the meeting and announce the names of those who provided public comment via email. All right, so we are moving on to item 2.01, the approval of the minutes from the February 17th meeting. This is for possible action. Does anyone have any changes?
Tyler, for the record, Tyler Rogers, I'd like to move to approve the minutes from the meeting of February 17th, 2022 as published.
Polly Boardman, second.
Okay, any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. All right, approved. Did you get the first and second?
I got it.
Sweet. All right, 2.02. Oh, wait, I forgot to mention. Oh my gosh, exciting, since we haven't seen each other in 2 months. On that note, The items that we approved on the February 17th meeting was the zoning for the, as we were calling it, the Rio Wrangler Area School. They were approved by the Board of Trustees. That school now has a name. It is called the J. Wood Raw. I almost got those turned around. So J. Wood Raw Elementary School. Mr. Raw was the principal at Dilworth Middle School, junior high back then, which is really cool. His family was there at the groundbreaking, and several members of the committee were there last week as well. It was a beautiful ceremony. We almost went to Oz. It was a little windy, but it was beautiful. The school will be wonderful, and our motions were approved for the zoning, so they're going to open next fall with a building full of neighborhood kids, which is exactly what we want. Neighborhood kids going to neighborhood schools. So thank you all for your hard work on that. All right, so let's move on to our presentation. Information and discussion only. We will not be taking action tonight on this item, as there have been several additional options presented and a lot of public comment and conversation. So we're going to just have some discussion tonight and then take some next steps in upcoming meetings. This change is for the 23-24 school year. We've heard a lot of questions about which school year this will take place in. So I want to clarify that for everybody. This is not for the upcoming school year. This is for a year from now. So, Adam, Sears, it's yours.
Okay, good evening. For the record, Adam Searcy, I'm the Chief of Facilities for the school district. Good to see you guys. Thanks for coming up here. Hopefully, I don't know, maybe some of you were even a part of this committee when zoning was established for this school. But if you haven't had a chance to come up to this school, I hope you enjoy it. It's one of our newest, proudest schools. Thanks to Principal Bringhurst and everybody for hosting us. Of course, the reason we're here is because we're planning to talk about Lenz and Hunsberger primarily, both of which are feeder elementary schools to Hers Middle. So, as usual, some context. This are the existing enrollment boundaries. Blue lines represent the elementary school boundaries, the colors represent the middle school zoning boundaries, and then these dark lines represent the high school boundaries. We're only here tonight to talk about the elementary school boundaries. Again, both of these elementary schools feed into the same middle school, so hopefully we can avoid those additional layers of concern. But you can see the existing elementary school boundary between Hunsberger and Lenz, kind of zigging and zagging irregularly through this little stretch of the neighborhood. And then also, as we'll look at more closely down here, cutting through a subdivision, maybe in a different way than we would look to draw those boundaries now. But just that's at first glance. Of course, you've got Hunsberger right next door. This is, you are here, right? Hunsberger is to our east, and then Lenz up in this neighborhood near Piccolo. On the next map, you can see this a little better, but to continue to get your bearings, you've got Arrow Creek Parkway, which curves dramatically at the bottom of the hill. If you guys can see my cursor there up on the screen. Wedge Parkway is a significant local roadway, and this blue line is running along Mount Rose Highway. Virginia Street is where this current enrollment boundary lies as well. This, if you can see probably better on your handouts, is the right-of-way corridor for I-580. So also a pretty prominent geographic feature. Back to Arrow Creek Parkway as it curves past Wedge towards Virginia Street. This is Zalesi. So for anybody who doesn't live all the way down here in this neck of the woods, really, I think, helpful and important as we talk through these options going forward. We've got Zalesi, Arrow Creek, Wedge, and of course Mount Rose, 580, and Virginia Street, really forming some noteworthy geographic boundaries in this community. All right, so This next slide is the same information, basically the existing boundary zones just overlaid on an aerial map. Again, you can probably see it better on your packet, but brings some of the additional neighborhood connectivity into better context when you can see where the subdivisions begin and end, and where there's golf courses, and where there's large drainage ways and creeks and things like that. All background and context. What we're really here to try to improve upon is this existing overcrowding at Lens and imbalanced enrollment utilization between these two neighboring elementary schools. These are the existing capacities and projected enrollments as the boundaries exist today. So you can see Lens currently over 100% capacity and projected to hover right thereabouts, and Hunsberger right around the 70 to 75% of capacity for the next 10 years, our current projections. Okay? This next slide, I'm going to hand over to Lauren Ford. These are two very different school buildings structurally, so really some noteworthy differences on how those buildings operate.
There we go. Is it on? Yeah. Am I? Okay. I'm hitting the wrong button. Sorry. So I had the opportunity with Principal Keller and Area Superintendent Anne-Marie Dixon to walk Lens School. We did a tour of all the current classrooms and how things are going. So this school year, Lens was given 3 additional teacher allocations. There was not classroom space for those teachers. So what the teachers opted to do with the principal was to create rover teachers. So for example, in the first grade classrooms, I should look at Mr. Keller. First grade. Yes, thank you. So in the first grade classrooms, there is a rover teacher. What that teacher does is travel to all of the first grade classrooms and pulls out small groups. She pulls them out to a different location and meets with those small groups. When she pulls them out like that, it does reduce the class size in the classroom. There are 3 grade levels that had that. He has an older building, a pod building is what it's referred to, with larger classrooms at the end of the pod, and inside the middle of the pod are smaller classrooms. So if you have 4 classrooms in a pod, the 2 at the end I would consider to be the largest of the classrooms. And then inside, they're much smaller classroom, almost half the size of the outside classroom. I might be a little, smaller. Those classrooms hold less children. So his class sizes in 5th grade currently are 32, 36, 35. In those 5th grade classrooms, they're located in the largest classrooms. It is not a classroom where you could easily walk up and down rows of students. You can walk the perimeter of the classroom. One of the teachers has it set up so she can also kind of go around the middle of the classroom so she can kind of circulate around to see students. It is maxed. They only have another small table in the corner. So if there's a small group needed for 5th grade, they would have to go to different locations. They cannot divide up in the classroom. There's no space. They either go outside or use different parts of the school. There are 3 lunches. Most elementary schools have 2 lunches. But because the school is older and the lunchroom is much smaller, there's 3 lunches. If the school were to grow more, there would have to be a need for even more lunches. One of the reasons why they really considered this year of going to a rover, not just because of the no classrooms, was the impact it would have had on music. Had he added 3 additional sections to music with 3 different classes again, then the music minutes would have decreased for all students at Lens. From an academic perspective, we do not want that to happen. We don't want for one school to have less minutes of music than another elementary school. We want to stick to the minutes that are allocated for elementary schools. So that was the updates from Lens with their current crowding conditions. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Lauren. Again, if you've been in these schools or in similar schools, Diedrichson, Dunn, Whitehead are all examples of that style of building type versus Hunsberger, which is similar to Double Diamond Elementary or Moss Elementary, you guys have a sense of how those building floor plans are able to accommodate minor overcrowding. It's never ideal, but oftentimes different floor plans can perform differently under those conditions. There's 10 more classrooms in Hunsberger than there are at Lenz. I mean, that's accounted for in our capacity numbers on slide 5. You can see significantly greater capacity at Hunsberger, but there's actually exactly 10 more classrooms at Hunsberger than there are at Lenz. So this next slide 7 is the same slide that we saw in March, last time we met, but we felt like that this was a good a grounding kind of reminder for the committee and for everyone that this committee is guided by Board Policy 7105 as well as Administrative Regulation 7107. These documents are available through a variety of avenues online, but are highlighted on our Zoning Advisory Committee website for the public. Those key considerations, I think, are always helpful to help center our conversations on what the board and this committee feels should be kind of our key considerations or guiding principles when, you know, challenging choices need to be made. Sometimes it's helpful to reflect back on how some of the different options may be better align with some of these key considerations versus others. It's difficult to make a purely quantitative assessment of these different options sometimes. So looking at some of these key considerations is always helpful. So again, just a reminder, kind of recentering the discussion, and we'll dive into some maps and some numbers. So as we often do, you may recall in March, we spent most of our time talking about the zoning for the new Rio Wrangler area elementary school. We introduced this topic, I believe, for the first time to the committee and to the community then. And at that time, we had an Area B that looks the same as what's shown here on slide 8. But then we had an Area A, which encompassed these two areas as well as this area on the opposite side of I-580 as Area A. So we'll talk about that more as we go through these options, and we can reflect back on the data that we depicted in March. But just to orient the conversation before we dive into the impact data slides, you know, again, this Area B remains the same as what was presented previously, and there are 34 elementary school students currently living in that area, which is zoned for Lenz. You can see that's on the opposite side of Zalesi Lane from Lenz and nearer Hunsberger geographically. Down here in Area A, we broke this area up into Area A1 and Area A2. The dividing line between those two areas is along Wedge Parkway, and you can see, hopefully, there's 41 students in Area A1 and 34 in Area A2. Again, this is Arrow Creek Parkway and that wedge between A1 and A2 and Mount Rose Highway on the south end. Okay? One thing we're going to talk about too a little bit, I think is best depicted on this slide, is sort of, you know, when we talk about neighborhood schools and compact attendance zones, and one of the admin regs talks about like avoiding islands, you know, not having an area zoned for a school that's physically disconnected, that type of stuff. So when you start looking at this Area A as we go through some of these options, I found that it's somewhat sequential. You know, like it's hard to get to just Area A2 until you get to Area A1. So if we're talking about rezoning Area A1 to Hunsberger, to get to another way of saying it is rezoning Area A2 to Hunsberger would almost require that area A1 is rezoned to Hunsberger as well. So I think as you dive into these scenarios in your mind, you'll see there's combinations that maybe want to be explored or discussed that are limited because of the proximity of those areas to the schools that are impacted. Hopefully that makes sense. But let's look at some numbers. So we've already seen what the numbers look like currently. And this slide talks about some Area A options. Again, we saw Area A as a whole back in March, and we can talk about that after we get through these new ones. But the numbers for Area A1 only, which on the previous slide we learned includes 41 current students and is sort of the nearest portion of Area A to Hunsberger. So again, if I'm going to move into Area A, bit by bit, A1 comes first. There's 41 elementary students that are currently zoned for Lens there. Rezoning them to Hunsberger would result in this first table on slide 9. So you can see 41 students has a meaningful impact on the enrollment imbalance, but maybe not quite as much as we might prefer. So that's option A1 only. The second table just takes it that next step further. So it includes Area A1 and Area A2. No change to Area B, so we would be moving this blue line here effectively over to encompass both of these areas. A1 and A2 to Hunsberger, coming out of Lens, no other changes. And you can see that has a much more significant impact on that enrollment imbalance, balancing out quite nicely as we move the projections into the future. So that's A1 and A2. Now, coincidentally, Area A2 has the same number of students currently in it as Area B. So as we move on to slide 10, we look at some B options. And the first one on there, option B only, we saw back in March. So Area B only from Lens to Hunsberger, which geographically is fairly appealing, right? It's very close to Hunsberger on the opposite side of Zalesi from Lens. So this is Area B again. Moving Area B only, Area B into Hunsberger. Again, only 34 students, doesn't quite do as much as we would like, not even as much as Area A1 only. So moving a bit further into our options, Area B and Area A1 produces the exact same impacts as Area A1 and Area A2, because Area B and Area A2 coincidentally have the same number of elementary school students in. So that's a similarly well-balanced combination. And then just for completeness sake, Area A1 and Area A2 and Area B result in the final table on slide 10. You know, maybe a little imbalanced out there in the later years, but we wanted to show it for completeness sake. So you guys have been through a number of these presentations with us before. We can go down all sorts of rabbit holes, and we do look at a wide variety of options in advance and try and bring forward to you the most obvious or plausible. You know, I wanted to just reiterate, refresh everybody's memory if anybody wasn't here in March, the option A, which was publicly depicted, was A1, A2, and this area on the opposite side of I-580, which has about 20 students in it. So Area A was a total of like 100 students. So we looked at that in March. Area A all by itself, without touching Area B, looked to be a little bit much. It was similar to A1, A2, and B, what we see here. So not ideal, but that was our first blush. I just wanted to kind of remind, because if we get into discussions, hey, this area over here was originally included in the base area A. There's about 20 kids here. But back to the whole sort of geographic barriers or just the proximity discussion. It's hard to get to this area A3, whatever we want to call it, without first getting to area A1 and A2, right? Like, I'm not seeing justification for rezoning this area to Hunsberger without also rezoning areas A1 and A2 to Hunsberger, just geographically speaking. I also wanted to highlight, we didn't include it in the presentation and it wasn't presented in March, but we've discussed it internally and we've received some public comment on it. There's a number of multifamily units along Arrow Creek Parkway between Wedge and Zalesi, kind of where my cursor is right now. Currently, there's approximately 80 elementary school students that live in this pocket here. So that's a larger number, and it creates a few different challenges when you're talking about these smaller areas, 34, 41 students, moving those around. You move 80 or 90 students from one school to another, and it complicates or limits a lot of the other options. But then also geographically, it's hard to envision a scenario where this area and this area go to Hunsberger, but these areas do not, right? Or something like that. So just looking at it without even looking at the numbers associated with them, looking at it kind of as a jigsaw puzzle, it's hard to develop a scenario where these communities are zoned for Hunsberger, when these other communities numerically would have to stay in Lens in order for the enrollment distribution to work out. So just for discussion, that's why this wasn't included, because we really couldn't develop a scenario that was plausible, but I know that the question is going to come. So there's about 85 elementary school students that live here currently in our zone for Lens. But the options that we've seen last time, area B, area A, and a combination of A and B, or the options that we have here before us today, area B only, area A1 only, area A1 and area A2 only, which is the same as area 1 and area B together only. So as you can see, we don't have a staff recommendation per se, the item's not for action, but that combination of area A1 and area B, or area A1 and area A2, resulting in a very nicely balanced enrollment distribution between the two schools, and like I said, coincidentally are the same from an enrollment standpoint. I think that's it, and would welcome the discussion, because that's really how we take this to the next step, get the public input, get your input, and help us decide the best way to try and better balance the resources and the enrollment in this community. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adam. I wanted to just remind the committee, not only are we regulated by Board Policy 7105 and Admin Regulation 7107, we're also regulated by some federal legislation, and I think it's really important because we did get some public comment that I think, personally, I think we kind of borderline on some concerns about this. So I'm just going to read this from the Washoe County website, because I think it's really important that we're all very upfront and comfortable having this conversation. So as required by Title, is it Title 9? No, Title 7 of the Civil, like Title VI, got my Roman numerals, whew, scary. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, the Age of Discrimination Act of 1975, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, and other laws and policies. Washoe County School District does not discriminate based on a person's race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, sexual orientation, gender, expression, or identity, genetic information, veterans or military status, marital status, political affiliation, or disability, or in any of its educational programs, services, employment, or employment opportunities in any program or activity conducted or funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The district is also an equal opportunity employer. And I think that it goes along with saying that this is really, really important that, especially since Neil's not here, that we're really careful that our conversations are not about the type of housing that students live in, because a home is a home, and it's about what the board has asked us to do is to find the best and most appropriate zoning based on safety, proximity, space availability, transportation growth, space optimization, keeping neighborhoods together, assigning students to the nearest schools, compact attendance zones, growth planning, aligned feeder patterns, and transportation. That's our focus. And so I know that we did get some great feedback in our public comment ahead of time, and I'm sure all the people here are going to give us some really, really important things to think about, but we need to make sure that we're focusing on those things for our decisions, not based on the type of housing that a student lives in. Okay, so should we do public comment first, or should we do discussion?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Christine Darren Fleck for the record.
Yes.
So if I'm reading you right, because I'm probably the one who asked last time, we're to make no consideration of SES, correct?
Correct. So for
Does that include free and reduced lunch, because that affects Title I?
Yes.
Correct? But
Yes.
Title I schools are zoned based on Title I, correct?
Right, so we as a zoning committee don't have any purview over anything about socioeconomic status. That's not part of our decision-making process. And Title I is decided based on other factors and not something that we even have the information on, so we can't be making those decisions. Lauren, did you want to add anything to that?
A school reaches Title I status based upon the qualification for free and reduced lunch numbers, not based on where the school is located.
Correct. But I know this district has made decisions to keep certain zones of high schools smaller. I'm just trying to wrap my head around what we're able to talk about, if we're able to talk about it, because I know certain high schools have a smaller percentage of students.
Right.
That was based on building capacity.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Tyler Rogers for the record. We are able to talk about demographics though, because that is spelled out in the slides.
Meaning?
We can understand the demographics of the population that could be zoned for a school.
Sure, like the numbers of kids in the school, sure. Just not ethnicity demographics.
Got it.
Or their income demographics.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Because we don't have that information, so we can't make decisions without factual information. The social studies teacher and me can't handle you guys. None of us, we have to use facts, that's important. All right, any other questions before we have public comment clarifying for Adam?
Do we want to wait to ask questions about it until public comment? Or after?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, sure. Okay, for our public that are here, thank you all for being here. We appreciate you. This is really an important part of the process. We really, truly appreciate you taking the time out this evening. We know that there's lots of kids' activities, and who doesn't want to be out at T-ball in this weather? So we appreciate you being here. If you have not filled out a green card and would like to speak, they are on the back table over there. And so we will start. First public comment.
Okay, when you go up there, just make sure you turn on the microphone, and I'll have a clock here. You have 3 minutes, and I'll just hold my phone up because we don't have a timer.
Perfect.
So the first one's Pablo Nava Duran.
Pablo, turn on your mic. Nope. Nope, it's not on. There
Okay.
we go, you got it.
So, it's good evening, zoning community. So, I heard you talk about the Gibraltar of Civil 1964. I want to clarify for this. So, Huntsbury and Lynn's are majority white students, so you need to worry about it for now. And also, they have a higher for the social economics that they mostly have enough money. They have like money and kind of like stuff. And they're both husband and Lynn's are non-Title I school. So moving on. So on the A1, so don't get me mad at me if I point one wrong. If it was something like you're opposed to it, let me know. So I've been in this neighborhood, but I don't live in this neighborhood, but I do know this neighborhood. So we do know we need to lease overcrowded lanes and moving to Huntsberger, and Huntsberger and Lynn's are going to Monsterhurst Middle School. So I post a A1 that create island and not enough overcrowded for Lynn. So A2 definitely to make it more balanced. And also they're both A1, A2 are both bus on Lynn, so the transfer Lynn to Huntsberger, they will be taken on bus. For area B, that one, they already have a bus to Lynn, so if we move to Huntsberger, that means they're on walk zone, we can reduce bus load. That's good, but the negative type is not enough overcrowded at Lynn, so over here on area B and plus A1, I think that's the most balanced one. Oh, plus the alternate area B doesn't have to go on a bus to Lindsay or go walk to Huntsberger. But the negative side is you create an A2 on islands. So all the combine A1, A2, and area B together, you create like Huntsberger overcrowded. So I was so that I'm gonna pick A1, A2 to Huntsberger, or A1 or area B to Huntsberger as well. So if your family have like something wrong with this area, if the area that you're opposed to and something wrong with this area, let me know, and I will be open-minded about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Pablo.
Ryan Kruger.
Good evening. My name is Ryan Kruger. I'm a local land specialist, land broker here in town. And my kids are zoned for lands. Just thought it would be important just to consider some of the future developments coming down the pipeline here. I know you mentioned the Arrow Creek Parkway and the total amount of students planned there now. That 10 acres just recently got approved for 150 additional units that will be breaking ground pretty soon. And then another 10 acres below that is getting pretty close. And I also kind of just went up and down the corridor. Another 400 plus units next to Moana Nursery was recently purchased and will be moving forward shortly. And then the entire, bottom of Foothill there could be a future potential, but 550 are approved, will potentially be breaking ground in the next couple of years. So it affects these projections. pretty significantly. And then if you look at the numbers, they get pretty good as they go along, but there could be a potential 2,000 plus units going to Lens here in the next 5 years. So just something to take into consideration when looking at these options and planning ahead, looking at all these A, B, A2 and whatnot. So that's all.
Thank you very much.
Whitney Zachary.
Hello, good evening. I'm Whitney Zachary. I live in Lens District or area. So I have a few questions that I asked at the last zoning meeting, and then she was wonderful and came to our PTA meeting and tried to answer some questions, but I still don't think my questions were quite answered. So about those Anovo apartments, my question is, they are zoned, they're kind of an island as themselves anyway, just where they are located. They are actually located closer by 2 miles to Brown Elementary School than they are to either Huntsberger or Lens. So my question is, why are those not getting considered to go to Brown Elementary School when Brown is eventually going to go to hers and to Galena? So it's all going to be integrated. Those kids won't have like a different area. Anyway, also, it's not a safety hazard because those kids have to get bused no matter where they are. They're not going to be crossing Virginia, so my question is, why can't those get moved over? Then, to go along with what he was saying, on Virginia by TMCC, the UNR campus, those apartments are going to be going in. Where are those apartments going? It's all going to get kind of crazy, I think. Anyway, so my question is, can those Anovo apartments get moved to Brown? That's 20 more kids over that way. And then you take option B, and there's 55 people, 55 kids going to Huntsberger and keeping all of A to Lens. Anyway, that's all I have to say. And see, hopefully you can spare it.
Oh, is that it? Oh, okay. All right. So I actually would like to know about transportation from Area B. It does, like, physically on the map look closer, but I'm assuming that those houses that are actually right by Zalezi are beyond the walk zone. So I'm assuming it's negligible, and that's why we did not talk about transportation, because maybe it actually does not make a difference.
So Adam Searcy, for the record, Area B is entirely bused across the Lezzie right now.
Yeah.
And I know that a portion of Area B would be within the walk zone to Hunsberger and a portion would not.
Okay.
So, I think from a purely transportation standpoint, there would not be an addition of an additional bus route, which is really kind of what moves the needle on our decision making.
Right.
But there would be some students who are currently provided transportation who would no longer be provided transportation.
Okay.
If Area B was moved to Hunsberger.
All right. Thank you. Other questions?
Adriana Publico for the record. Piggybacking on that question, are there any transportation implications for A1 and A2?
No, they are all provided transportation currently to Lens, and all would also be outside of the walk zone of Hunsberger, so that would be a wash.
Okay, so last time we met in February, I asked about residential construction projects, and you said that there were some in A. We had some public comment referring to that. Normally, those projects are generally baked into our projections. Anything that you heard recently that's not part of the projections? Or is it all in there I mean, there's a certain point at which during the permitting process, it becomes part of the projections because we know it's likely to happen, right? Yes, okay. No surprises for you in what we've
No
heard.
surprises, but if you guys don't mind, I think it'd be fair to elaborate just a little bit on the record. A lot of the folks have not been to our meetings before. The school district does utilize a tremendous amount of data, including subscribing to the University of Nevada's Center for Regional Studies, who tracks all pending and approved residential developments throughout our community. We collaborate with all of our regional agencies, the City of Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County, take all available information and input that into our enrollment projection model. Of course, also converting population development into student generation, which we've talked about before, using empirical coefficients. Hey, on average, of every 100 single-family homes, that generates 10 elementary school students, things of that nature. We do our best. The absolute best available information through a variety of sources are incorporated into these 10-year projections, which is a significant amount of time into the future. All of the developments that were mentioned under public comment are all familiar to me and are all included into the enrollment projections that are depicted here tonight. Just for everyone's benefit, we heard about a project off of Virginia Street near Moana Nursery, I believe is up in this area, is very much within the Lens Elementary School zone. We talked about additional multifamily projects along Arrow Creek near Wedge intersection, a continuation of the multifamily projects that have already been developed and that I mentioned earlier are currently generating upwards of 80 elementary school students for Lens. We heard about these apartments earlier that were included in Area A, the original Area A, as being potentially rezoned to Brown. And then we heard, if you guys caught it, I knew what you were talking about, a significant townhome project. This isn't really letting me get there, but would be sort of southeast quadrant of the, Wedge Mount Rose intersection, sort of behind or south of the TMCC Redfield campus. So that's a significant 150 townhomes, something like that, years away from breaking ground even. You know how long years these developments take to be constructed and be fully occupied. But you can see in the Hunsberger and Lens projections, they do reflect slight increases in enrollment in those outer years. I think most people, myself included, are a little bit surprised to see how low the student generation rates really are. When we talk about 150 market rate townhomes, that will look like a lot to the people that live there, and it will generate a lot of traffic. That's a different conversation. But it won't generate more than just a handful of elementary schools based on our historical per capita data. There's other developments behind Galena High School on the south side of Mount Rose that will be zoned for the Hunsberger enrollment zone. But I just appreciate you guys, I appreciate the question to put it on the record. Certainly a crystal ball, but we spend a lot of time and use the best available information to ensure that our enrollment projections are as accurate as possible. Thank you.
Adam, this is Christine Cole for the record. I did attend the PTO meeting, and we talked for a long time. We had lots of questions from a pretty big number of parents at Lens with some questions, and Pleasant Valley and Brown were brought up as far as their enrollment capacities, and just kind of wondering if there's any flexibility, since we've already reached the whole Virginia Street thing with Brown Elementary students coming here to Marcy Hers and to Galena. And I know that your office is very thorough in looking at all of the options. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the capacities at Brown and Pleasant Valley, and just kind of share a bit about why those are not really options on the table here.
Sure. So I don't have material to illustrate this well. Pleasant Valley Elementary School is quite a few miles south down 395 from this area, but Brown, as was mentioned in public comment, is not far away, but it is, of course, on the other side of some major roadways. So I think the short answer to your question as to why the area A3, if you will, which was originally in area A, was not depicted here today is because we found that the A1, A2, or the A1B, A1 and area B combinations were actually slightly better numerically and slightly simpler from a disruption standpoint. Like, let's not move any more people than we have to achieve kind of optimal balance. That said, we absolutely looked at those numbers. One scenario that I believe I heard just now, moving area A3 or just this area to Brown, which, as was mentioned, they're currently zoned for Lens, but then hers and Galena. So it would still only affect the elementary school level. So rezoning these kids to Brown, coupled with moving area B to Hunsberger, both of these relieving Lens, works okay. It takes Lens down to approximately 90% of capacity. But again, not maybe quite as well balanced as some of these other options, and we felt maybe moving a few more students or maybe a little more disruptive than some of these other options. But that option of, we'll call this A3 and B, well, A3 to Brown and B to Hunsberger, leaving A1 and A2 intact, is a viable option. That does not populate Hunsberger quite as much. It leaves Brown Brown has capacity with the opening of the new school, so they're in the 80% range. Hunsberger's left in the 75% range, and Lens is in the 90% range. So just fine, not as perfectly balanced, and we thought maybe not as simple of a solution as some of these other options.
So Natalie Geisels for the record. I live in the area left of A1. My kids go to Hunsberger, and when you drive into our development, half the neighborhood goes to Hunsberger and the other half goes to Lens, and so every morning there's two buses coming in. So buses waiting to take the kids to Lens, and then buses that are eventually coming around to Hunsberger since it's a little bit later. So in my opinion, it would seem right to have the entire area going up to Hunsberger, so it's just one transportation route, looping both circles. I walk those circles every day. It's about a 2-mile walk, but it's a Hunsberger circle and a Lens circle just located within, which seems to be the same neighborhood. So people are usually a little shocked that, right across the street, the bus picks up at Hunsberger, and directly across the street, everyone goes to Lens. So that would be my feedback of the entire neighborhood going to Hunsberger together to relieve the Lens overcrowding.
Darren Fleck for the record. I just had a question. I don't know, transportation-wise, those kids in quote A3, that bus, does it take a right and go up Mount Rose and then through the neighborhoods to Lens, or does it go down to the current intersection that we're already worried about for the Brown issue? And that was my only question, is because they're either going up to the right and then going all the way through the neighborhoods, or they're going down, taking a left on Virginia and going through that intersection anyways to go all the way down to Lens. So, if they're already going through the intersection on a bus, then is that something, that we know?
I don't know exact route. They certainly are provided transportation. So exactly the efficiency or the logistics of that, I can't confirm.
Darren Fleck again. that would be my only concern, is if we do have wiggle room with that group of apartments there to either help fill Brown or relieve Lynn's even more, would be if transportation is already taking them down to that major intersection and then down Virginia Street. I wouldn't see any difference in them going through the intersection because they're making a left-hand turn anyway. If they do, for safety factors, and do come up Mount Rose and wind their way through to Lynn's, then I could understand the difference there. But otherwise, I don't see a big difference.
Christine Hull for the record. So Adam, I think just based on some public feedback, but also what we're talking about here, I think maybe we need a little more information about that area A3, so the transportation implications as well as how many students. Because I'm imagining there's not enough for just a bus. So I'm imagining that particular bus has to go there and then pick up other students. And so perhaps you can reach out to transportation and get a little feedback on that area, because that one does seem, that one actually seems like an island. And it's pretty far from Lynn's geographically, and so it seems like maybe we do have some options with that particular area, and I would like to see some projections with that, especially knowing how many students there are, or if it's a transportation issue. If it's part of a bus, then maybe that's why it was done that way.
I mean, the residential units in that area are very, very new.
Yeah.
And the enrollment boundaries are not. So the enrollment boundaries were probably drawn just on the basis of the road network.
Yeah, that's what I'm imagining.
There's about 20 elementary school students who live in that area right now. They for sure get a bus. They're bused to Lens. I imagine that the bus turns somehow towards area A2 and A1 and picks up some more kids and then works their way up to Lens, I would suspect. You know, A3 to Brown is totally plausible.
Okay.
It's what other pieces we piece together to balance back out Hunsberger and Lens, and we tried a variety of combinations, and A1, A2, and B get us there a little bit cleaner. But A3 is something that we can easily bring back and put together some scenarios for consideration and include more detailed discussion about transportation impacts, but likely it ends up being a wash from a kind of a district standpoint. It's logistics. They have to reconfigure the routing, but it doesn't require the addition of a bus driver or something like that.
Okay, I'm actually imagining that this scenario would actually add a bus. And the reason I'm wondering that is because if they start in A3 and pick up kids, and then we move either A1 or A2, then that's gonna actually bring a whole nother bus potentially, because then A3 stays at Lens, so then it's not going. So I guess that's why maybe we need to do some routing with transportation. I know that they're really excited to have these conversations with us.
I mean, listen, Brown Elementary School has students on buses.
Yeah.
You know, and so they'll come
perhaps
over
they
and
could
pick these
pick
kids up
them
too.
up and then, yeah.
That's probably how it will work out. But, you know, I'll dig into those details.
Okay.
We have the enrollment data on A3, so just asking a few
Yeah.
questions of transportation on what A3 to Brown might look like is no big deal.
I think that would be really helpful. Any other questions, Christy?
Christy has that for the record. So I was just curious. I know that on the map it looks like Area B is super close to Hunsberger. We cut half of it so that we'd have half in the Wong Zone. I'm just seeing though that how much basically Area A1 and A2 have to go around Hunsberger to get up to Lens. What is the distance? And this is my question. What is the distance from Area A2 to Hunsberger? Like in miles? Because right now it seems like they're being bused an awful long way to get up to Lens.
Yeah, I don't have a measurement.
Versus
It's
the people that are in B. I was
Lens
just
is
curious
kind of
distance.
buried, you know? Lens doesn't have a big arterial Arrow Creek Parkway to just zoom from, you know, Wedge Parkway. You're kind of zigging and zagging up Zalesi and whatever the main street is here. Distance-wise, you know, you're probably in the 2.5 miles from Area A2 to Hunsberger. It's probably close to the same to Lens. But again, different routes, you know. You can probably, as the amount of time it would take you to drive up Wedge and drive up Arrow Creek versus zig and zag through these neighborhoods. It's probably a couple minutes difference.
So Natalie Geisels, for the record, since I live again on the Hunsberger side of the area A1, that neighborhood is basically the same neighborhood, so it takes me 5 minutes to drive up to Hunsberger. Just head up straight Melrose Highway and turn right on Thomas Creek. So that A1 area seems farther away, but is pretty much the same neighborhood as already the area of Hunsberger to the left.
How would you get from your house to Lens? Or how much farther do you think that would be?
So that is interesting because if we do go to our friend's house that lives in Lens, we kind of take the back road, Thomas Creek, go around. It seems like you take a lot more different streets to get to Lens than just a couple streets up to get to Hunsberger.
There's like residential stop signs and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
and you're weaving through the neighborhood rather than just a straight shot.
Polly Boardman. Do you know if there's a historical significance to that pumpkin teeth section on B? Like, is there a reason why we're pumpkin teeth?
I'm really appreciative of your nicknames. You know how much I like nicknaming our pub pieces. I wish I knew. There was probably somebody that lived somewhere that led to that jack-o'-lantern pumpkin tooth. I think that's noteworthy though, and Natalie, I appreciate you bringing up this area between Hunsberger and Lens. I would just suggest to the committee, even if we don't make any changes, that redrawing these lines on more logical boundaries, even just from a cleanup standpoint, should be considered. It's debatable. It results in change, which in and of itself is not to be taken lightly, but yeah, I don't know why those lines were drawn the way they were.
Brooke Snyder, for the record. On that topic, when was the last time that any zoning changes were made for these areas?
Of course, with the opening of the middle school, considerable rezoning impacted this community, both at the middle school and some areas at the high school level as recently as 2020-2021 school year. But no elementary school boundaries were changed at that time, and I could not tell you off the top of my head how long it's been since an elementary school boundary was adjusted in this area.
And Christine Hull, for the record, I think it's really important to add that this area has seen significant growth in the last 20 years. And so my guess is that a lot of these lines were drawn as developments, and many of these developments are more like custom home groupings, and so people would buy a lot and build, and then there'd be like 4 lots empty, and then another lot would get built. And so I'm kind of just guessing that there was a lot of like kind of weird lines drawn simply because there weren't homes there at the time. It's kind of like the Daybreak area. When we looked at that area, we're like, who drew these lines? Well, because they were in the middle of a farm. Right, and so I mean, just both my uncles are builders, and they build in this area, and that's kind of how this has been for the last 20 plus years. Is it's all been individual lots in a lot of these areas. Now, granted, there's definitely some subdivisions that have been built, but a lot of it has been very lot based. So that's kind of my guess, but I'd say years and longer than any of us have been involved, for sure. Anything else?
Tyler Rogers, for the record. So I'd like to just, I'm happy we're going to look at A3 going to Brown. I think it also is consistent with what I've observed, which is using major interstates as a boundary line. And currently, I-80. A3 is on sort of the eastern side of I-80 versus, or 395, sorry, getting my highways wrong, but yes, now it's 580. Anyways, old 395. That's right. So I think that remaining consistent with the decisions we make, I think, is important. And if we're going to use major interstates as the boundary line, that it sticks with that. I am curious if are there, as we look at the area of the multifamily homes where you said there are about 80 students that is north, I guess, of A2 and A1, are there there are lines on the map? Are any of those roads, like, or is there another place if we wanted to draw the line through there versus having it be further to the south?
So the area that I was mentioning, there's, I think, 2 major apartment complexes right along Arrow Creek Parkway. This is Arrow Creek Parkway, and these are parcel lines.
Okay.
They're right here. So that's where we wrestled with a couple different options, carving those out as their own separate area A4 or something like that, or just including it, extending this area A1. Now you run into sort of a problem where these areas are now blocked almost from lens. So they've got to either be included in a rezone to Hunsberger, or now we're talking about possibly rezoning these areas to brown. But it just geographically and the way the roads interconnect, it became complicated to try to rezone these areas or future multifamily developments along Arrow Creek Parkway in between Wedge and Zalezi, anywhere other than Lens.
Yeah. One last question, which is the neighborhood that is to the east of what's on the map is Wolf Run Golf Club. I'm just sort of curious to your thoughts. I mean, if we added Area B to Hunsberger, I have houses that are probably closer to Hunsberger than these homes to the east of Wolf Run are to Lens. It feels like it's still kind of an odd chunk to the south. Does that make sense? I'm just curious, why not draw lines through that neighborhood?
Are you suggesting a concept where we would split Area B into sub areas?
I think I'm just curious why we've left the neighborhood that is to the east of the Wolf Run Golf Club remaining with Lens.
So over here.
Yeah. Why zero in on Area B versus some of that as an Area B?
I think the clubhouse is in this area, so this line here seemed fairly definitive. And then these neighborhoods, they don't connect to Arrow Creek Parkway very well. I think you can meander your way through all the way down here. I'm not even sure that this isn't gated or something like that. These communities really tend to feed in and off of Zalezi a lot more, which puts them, much closer to Lens. So, I mean, that's a fair question. We have not explored that previously. I'm going to come back to this aerial. And this shows the existing lines, not the proposed boundary where you can see B. But it looks like there's some actual holes, some golf holes, and then the clubhouse itself. So, you're suggesting something where you would take this area to the east of Wolf Run and try and carve out some area that would be rezoned into Hunsberger.
I don't know if I'm proposing anything. I'm just trying to understand why you guys chose to focus on Area B versus that part of the stuff to the east of Wolf Run. And it could be as simple as B is just closer to Hunsberger, so it's like a walk zone thing.
I think if anything, it has to do with the golf course itself. Really, those fairways and that clubhouse, it's definitely separating those.
Adam, I think you're right. I've been in that neighborhood a couple of times, and most of those houses do use Zalezi and don't use Arrow Creek. I'm not saying like the whole neighborhood's like that, but I'm thinking that makes a lot of sense. Zalezi tends to, if that's your main arterial, you're actually a little more accessible to Lens than you would be to Arrow Creek. So that makes a lot of sense. But I mean, I think all the options are always worth looking at.
Christy has it for the record. I'm just curious, does the Washoe County School District own any of the property that is off of 395/new I-580, sorry?
Sorry, I messed with my Zoom here.
Christy, do you mean for like an additional elementary school
If there's
potentially?
a need for an additional elementary school, is there any property there for reserved for later on if?
I believe that was brought up at the last meeting, and there was, I don't believe there's an expectation of that in the future growth on the growth timeline. There's not a plan for an additional elementary school in this area.
Yeah, I can confirm that's correct. We don't own any parcels in this area, nor do we project a need for any additional schools.
Darren Fleck for the record. Adam, since you brought it up, I apologize. But I had a question for Ms. Ford too, just in the fact that it looks like that western half of B is probably a lot of custom homes with very few sidewalks probably, and you appear in the aerial photo to have some unincorporated land probably along that very sharp 90-degree angle on that far western corner of B. Are there, when it comes to busing with elementary schools, are there considerations of the landforms and walkways?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
Mhm.
So
And that goes
my
into
thing,
theirs.
Adam, is since you broached it first, and then I can pawn it off on you maybe. An idea of, I really like 1 and 2 just going to Huntsberger, but you have a main thoroughfare, right? Thomas Creek continues straight through and divides B in half, correct? And that would seem to provide a nice little box in that left-hand corner of B. If you're looking for a few more students, those lots I would guess might have fewer elementary kids than the east side of B, and might somehow clean that up per what was mentioned earlier with that area. And I don't know, so, but I do like 1 and 2. I just thought since you mentioned cutting B in half with Thomas Creek, that might be able to draw a few more kids over. And if someone knows that area better than me with how Thomas Creek divides B, please let me know.
I don't live there, but I do know that Thomas Creek definitely does, run up and down area B. I was back on slide 9 looking at option A1 and A2. You can see the impact data, the projection. We know area B has about 34 students in it. It's likely not going to be even, but say there's 15 students in that easternmost portion of area B, right? If we split area B down Thomas Creek, you'd be looking at A1, A2 plus B1. You'd see 15 more students in Huntsberger, 15 fewer students in Lens. I think that's a plausible option. That's that would be one we could explore next time.
Darren Fleck for the record. I'm totally okay with your numbers for A and B, or excuse me, A1 and 2 only. But if there was something there where that western side with the bigger lots might have had fewer kids, it might be something that would allow us to clean that up a little bit, make the area a little more concise instead of jutting down. And then that eastern half of B would seem to be more of a contiguous with the eastern side of that southeast lens corridor. And then those homes with those land markings there would seem to maybe have possibly fewer elementary school kids. And maybe not as big of an impact of 15 or 20 with 34 in that total community as a whole as it's marked now.
And so just to make sure I understand what you're saying correctly, subdividing B into two halves on Thomas Creek, taking the eastern half, or pardon me, the western half here to Huntsberger, and leaving this half in Lens.
Right.
Okay.
I would just think that it might, with moving 1A and or all of A to Huntsberger, that would seem to possibly, with the size of the lots, have fewer elementary school kids and might provide a little buffer and straighten up that area a little bit. Instead of looking as, because it does look, if you look at it on the map, you have these lines very close to Huntsberger, when, it just might seem a little more rational with that and might not have as much of an impact with the size of the lots and the type of homes up there for having little kids.
Yeah, it's an older neighborhood, people buy and sell homes. I don't know how many kids live there. We'll do what you said and give the area some braces or something.
Where would you draw the southern boundary? Where are you thinking of drawing the southern boundary if you split up B into two?
I would say that the southern boundary would you would still have the little jack-o'-lantern teeth on the eastern half, but on the western half, where that little jagged line comes down, the southern half would end up being Zalesi if you went west of Thomas Creek. And so Huntsberger would go north to Zalesi and west of Thomas Creek, which would give you two major thoroughfares as your border. And if there are fewer kids on that half, maybe just 10, then it might make that balance a little better and clean that up just a little bit with two major thoroughfares as your border.
Polly Boardman.
Darren, I appreciate what you're doing there. I think it's nice to have the split. My concern overall is just keeping those teeth. Like having neighbors next to each other go to different schools, it's almost worse there than it is in Natalie's neighborhood, So I think, I would like to see better boundaries, because if we had to justify that later of why we left houses next to each other cut out, I think that we'd have a hard time justifying that. I also wonder though, Darren, maybe if that bottom corner, the 20 kids went to Brown, it would alleviate the numbers that we saw in the chart a little bit for that whole area. Maybe the 34 would balance that out. We'd only have 14 difference between the two.
Adriana Publico for the record. Maybe this is more of a question for Lauren. We don't see the spaghetti charts anymore because we've cleaned up most of the split feeders, but it's useful for me to see where elementary kids matriculate to in the verticals. So can you remind us which elementaries feed into hers, which middle schools feed into Galena?
Yes, just a second.
You can phone a
Adam.
By all means.
Okay, so Brown, Pleasant Valley, Huntsberger, and Lens all feed into hers, correct? I got it, look at me. Yeah. So none of these changes will impact middle school or high school decisions, including the A3, would not impact any middle school or high school students, and so this is purely an elementary school rezone.
Bonus question, how many middle schools feed into Galena?
2.
Well, you gotta name them.
Pine, part of Pine, not all of Pine, part of Pine. That's one of our only split feeders, and Marcy Hurst.
Yeah.
Oh, they do go to mine now. That's right.
Just hers?
Thank you for space to
Just
come
hers.
on. We now zone
Thank you.
the
So just hers now. Just hers goes to Galena, and like most of Durrell, which is not a Washoe County school, but it's a chunk of students. Yes. Thank you all.
Pine does split.
But Pine is
but
still a
it's
split feeder. I was
between
correct.
Damani and Reno.
I did know it was a split feeder. Just doesn't go to Galena anymore.
Right.
Okay, that was a good question, thank you. Okay, do we have anything else? I think we have given Adam some good feedback. Yeah, okay. Well, then I think we'll close out that item. So item 3.01 is general public comment.
Pablo Nava Duran.
And just as a reminder, general public comment is not related to any of the items on our agenda tonight.
Okay. That would be a good question on Huntsburg Lane situation. That's a very good question. On land development, I want to say thank you for that. So I think a majority of this community support area B to go to from Lens to Huntsburg. That will create relief for the bus route to Lens. Have to go walk to Huntsburg. So it's good. It's a very good question. You go on the next meeting, and I'm not sure what next meeting is. You're Brown or Galena High School. So where it is. So Brown, Pleasant Valley, then Huntsburg go to Marcy Hurst Middle School and go to Galena High School. And I heard Galena High School have a 2 middle school, Hurst and Pine, but Pine doesn't go to Galena anymore. That goes to Worcester, Damani, and Reno High School, because if Huffaker moved to Galena High School, that would be differential issues. So that Huffaker go to Reno High School, and Smithsburg doesn't go to Galena High School anymore. That go to Damani High School. So that's what. So I want to make it clear for that. And also, we have like a bus labor shortage. I have a graph, but I did not show it tonight. I forgot to show it tonight, but. Beside of Incline High School, the affected bus shortage, no bus for this week. So beside Incline, I know the very rural area. The money was the most absent student. Many students are missing school and the money went to high school because of a bus cannot get to and from school. Mostly on New World area. And mostly next meeting talk about the Huntsburg Lands, and then next year about August talk about a Northwest Reno, all of Northwest Reno for high school, because I have acquainted based on 3 high schools, that Hug, Reno, and McQueen high schools. All mid schools need to split. We want all of mid school together to through high school. And after that, after the Northwest Reno cleanup to high school, I think we could talk about the new world zoning and how many bus drivers that need to be reduced, make it rezoning to closer school as possible. That really affect, because a bus driver, they're making $14 per hour. So thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Pablo. Do we have any other public comment? Okay,
I didn't read the, I'm supposed to read the names of
yes,
the email public comment. I didn't do it.
Thank you. Yes, you
So
did.
you got email public comments from Julia Angst, Mike Allen, Elizabeth Leppy, and Dawn Martins.
And those were all related to item 2.02. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, that was me.
Look at that. Interesting. Open meeting law. Okay, on just general public comment, he couldn't be here tonight, but Trustee Adam Mayberry called in earlier, and he was hoping to be here, but he wanted to thank all of you for your service and for being here and doing this hard work. I know that you guys don't all go to the trustee meetings, but they're all very appreciative of us doing the groundwork and all of the conversations we're having with our community. So he couldn't be here tonight, but he wanted to say thank you. All right, anything else? Okay, we are adjourned.